Today I'm working on my snapper garden tiller with a 5 horsepower Briggs and Stratton engine. I'm going to go over a few tips on inspecting and servicing the ignition system on it. This engine was built before 1982, so it still has the points and condenser system in it. The newer models after 1982, it done away with all that, and it had a upgraded magneto or coil or whatever you want to call it on it that didn't require the points and condenser. Points and condenser works good when they're set up right, but they also take a little extra maintenance to keep them going good. I have already went and removed the flywheel cover and this little finger guard right here. The flywheel cover has one bolt in the top, and then down at the bottom it has one on each end, and then this little screen guard, it just has 2 little screws that bolts it into the ratchet clutch. First thing I'm going to do before I try taking the flywheel off, I'm going to loosen the coil up to give us clearance to get it out of here. You have the magnet on the flywheel. You just want to make sure whenever you're trying to loosen this up, pull the flywheel off or anything, you want to have it turned away from the coil so it's not trying to grab on it. I'm just going, it's got two little bolts right here that holds it on. Mine are a 5/16. So I'm just going to break each one loose. And remember, when you tighten this stuff, these screws up, you don't want to over tighten them because it's screwing into aluminum. You don't want to strip that out. So I just got it lifted up as high as they'll go, and I'm just going to barely snug them just to hold it in place. Just to make things a little easier, I'm going to go ahead and remove the spark plug. I've went through this and already serviced and inspected it because I've had a no firing condition. And I've already determined that my ignition coil is bad. One thing, you can just look at it, the insulation on all the wires is cracked, and the ground wires coming off of going to the frame ground and to the points of condenser are also frayed. So that's just a no-brainer right there that this thing needs to be replaced itself. But there could also be other issues that could cause a no-fire condition also. Removing the spark plug just makes it a little easier to turn the crankshaft while working on it. Next thing I got to do is get this ratchet clutch off here. They make special tools for taking this off and holding the flywheel while you're doing this, but you can get by with just some basic hand tools. You can use like a center punch and a hammer and hit right on the tabs of the screw holes on it. What I did was I took a screwdriver, a good size screwdriver with a plastic handle and a hammer. I got a screwdriver that I didn't mind messing up the end right here. What I did, I put the plastic end on the ratchet itself so I won't damage it. I'm just hitting it with plastic, and I just tap it loose. What I did, hold the flywheel, I got me a pry bar like this. And you don't want to stick it in these fins where the magnet is, because that looks like that's aluminum. So what I did, I got it right in here between some of these steel fins, and just got it turned, magnet away from the coil, and I got it wedged in down here against the plows right here to hold it stationary while I break this loose. Put the plastic in against that bolt hole right there on that little ledge. You want to be careful not to hit any of these fins. Make sure your fingers are clear away from them too. Sometimes this comes off fairly easy, sometimes it's difficult. I've already had this off, so that made it that much more easy. Just unscrew it. And there's a bevel washer right here. You remove it, set it to the side, and just remember how you take all your parts off, because you're going to put everything back together the same way. This washer's beveled. The bevel side goes to the outside. Next thing I gotta do is, when these things been on here, you have to break the flywheel loose from the crankshaft. A way I figured out to do it, I screwed the ratchet back on with the washer out, screw it back up to its snug, and as soon as it snugs, I just back off of it just a hair. And what I do, I take my hammer, take my pry bar loose. And basically what I did, I got me a piece of wood. I'm just using the handle of this wire brush right here. Put it against the ratchet clutch. I just tap on it a few times. When I done that, it broke that flywheel loose from that crankshaft. You can also get a pry bar back behind here and kind of just give it a little pressure while you do that to help pull it off. It would be better to use a rubber hammer. If you used a rubber hammer, you could just hit this directly, but that's why I put this piece of wood in between it, because this wood's soft and it won't damage that. You also want to be careful when you put a pry bar behind here, you're not putting it against any aluminum engine parts, because you don't want to damage anything. What I would do was try to press it against the frame that runs right here. That way you don't hurt the engine anyway. Spin the clutch back off, then have the magnet where it's not facing the coil, just pull it straight off, and you have a flywheel key that fits in this groove right here. You want to make sure you get that off the crankshaft. Sometimes it sticks in the crankshaft, sometimes it'll stick in the flywheel itself. One little key thing to remember when you're putting this back together, this flywheel key is not perfectly square. One side's just a little bit longer than the other. The longer side faces down onto the crankshaft itself. Let's see if I can turn this so I can show you. When you put it back in there, you want to have that long side facing in that groove to where it don't wobble back and forth. These two little screws on mine are 1/4 inch. I'm just going to break them loose. Spin them on out. And just pull this cover straight off. If you have a lot of dirt built up right around the rim of this cover, it'd be a good idea to clean it off before you remove this. What you're checking for is these two contact points. That's your points right there in your condenser. They make contact right here as the crankshaft turns. When it gets into position for it to fire, it has a little lobe on it, and it has a little camera that goes down that rides off the crankshaft. And when it hits a certain point, that point will come down and make contact with the condenser right there. You can see it right there. It's real small, but it's right there. And basically what happened is, if this gap isn't set completely right, if it's too far off, it won't make contact and you won't get your fire. If it's too close, the ends of them will actually burn up prematurely, and even over time they burn up and get corrosion on them. If they're too badly burnt, you have to replace them, but if they just got a little corrosion on them, you can take a points file. What I use is just a little piece of 180 grit sandpaper, and with it wide open, you want to get in there and clean them points and them contacts really good. With it fully open, just try to wiggle it in there. And it's got a spring tension, so you can kind of pull it just a little bit to get your piece of sandpaper in there, but you don't want to pull it to where you bend it to where it won't line up right. You just go back and forth, kind of hold it in place so you don't bend it. And you want to sand it until you get them connections nice and shiny. You can take a flashlight and you can see the light shine off of them. If they're real bad pitted, then you need to go ahead and replace them. After you get done checking them, you want to check the gap in them. On this engine, the points gap is 20 thousandths of an inch. You want to use a flat blade feeler gauge or wire feeler gauge like this. Pick out the right one. With them wide open, as far as they open, you want to take your blade and you want to be able to just barely slide it in there. It should be a real tight fit. You should feel no play at all in it. If you can slide in there very easily and you feel no tension on it, then you got too big of a gap. If you can't get it in there, it's too small. You want to make sure while you're pushing it in there that the points itself is not coming up with it. You just want to barely feel a little tension on it when you slide it in. On this setup right here, only thing you got to do to adjust it is loosen that little screw right there and just barely loosen it and just barely move it which way you need to. It's kind of a hit and miss with trying to adjust points like this. Sometimes you may move it a little too much, sometimes you may not move it enough. It's good to get the feeler gauge in there like so and kind of loosen it up and make sure you got it perfectly straight and hold it. It's good to have a helper when you're doing this too, so you can hold it while they loosen and tighten that screw up to adjust it. And then once you got it set, you want to tighten that down. Always double check it and make sure you got it good. And once you get done with it, you want to turn the crankshaft till it closes and make sure it's hitting, the two contacts are hitting perfectly even with each other. Sometimes when you buy new ones and stuff, you may have to bend the points a little bit. Sure, your two wires going to got one goes to the coil, one that goes to the shut off switch that grounds it out. You want to make sure that they're in place where they are supposed to be. At the end of the condenser right here, it's just got a little hole in the end that they slide through, and then the spring at the end kind of holds them in place. You want to put your cover back on. It's got little indentations right here for the condenser and the points for this little point bolt right here. Slide it back in place. Start your screws back in. And tighten it up. I suggest using a 1/4 inch ratchet on this screws like these, or a pair of nut drivers, because you do not want to over tighten this, because all that's aluminum, and just barely over tighten it can strip them out. Next thing I'm going to check is the coil itself. I'm going to remove the screws from it. Be careful when you're taking this off, because you have that wire going to the condenser, so you don't want to yank that loose. And you just want to check it out. See, one way I can tell mine is bad is because this wire strip right here is all coming apart. Even this part on the coil itself is fraying off. So that's letting me know that this thing, it's time to replace it. But sometimes the contact points, well, they don't really come in contact with the flywheel. You have a gap in there, but as the magnet goes around the flywheel, comes across these, it gives it the energy to spark. And sometimes these will get dirt or grease or rust on them, and it'll cause it not to fire. So if it's got some dirt or whatever on there, take you a clean shop towel and clean that off real good. And if it's got some rust on there, you can take some sandpaper. I used 180 grit sandpaper and just clean that up real good so it starts getting a little shiny again. You don't want to go too crazy on it where you damage it, but you want it nice and clean too. And put it back together. And it has a little ground wire right here that goes to this bolt hole. I'm going to make sure you put that back on there. Then all I'm doing is I'm lifting it as far up as possible, so when I put the flywheel back on, I got enough clearance to get it through there. And I'm just barely snugging it up until I do my adjustments. Another place that can get dirty is on the flywheel itself, the magnet. I cleaned this one up, but it was really rusty. And if it's got a lot of rust or grease or anything on it, that could cause a problem too. Briggs and Stratton says that will not cause a problem, but I have a couple years before when I had the problem with this tiller, only thing I done was pull the flywheel off, clean the magnet on it, and clean the contact points on the coil, and it fired right up. So that's another thing you want to keep in consideration too, is make sure that magnet's clean on there. Don't forget to put this little dust shield back on your ignition coil before you go any further also. Next step is putting the flywheel back on. You want to position your crankshaft to where the keyway is somewhere near the top where you can see it really good. Just go in here, slide it back in place, and then line your keyway up on your crankshaft and on your flywheel up. Next thing you want to do is put your flywheel key back in. You also want to inspect your key to make sure that it's not sheared, it's properly squared. You want to look at it real good. Once you determine it is good, you can go ahead and put it back in. If it's got any damage on it, it's a good idea to go ahead and replace it now, because if it is damaged, it's just going to wind up shearing in the near future. Like I said earlier, one side is a little longer than the other. The long side is going to face down, and short is going to be bottom to top. So you want to line it up real good. This can be kind of tricky. Just wiggle a little bit till you get it started in there. Sometimes they can be a real booger to slide in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be careful not to damage these threads right here. I'm going to take a screwdriver and just kind of tap it into place. That's it. So it's in place. It's all the way in. Make sure I got it pushing there as best as I can. Alright. Next thing we're going to do is put the clutch back on. You got your bevel washer. You want the bevel facing outwards. Slide it in place. Go ahead and spin your clutch back on. Get it good and hand tightened. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the magnet on the flywheel, face it kind of downwards. And I'm going to get my pry bar in here to hold it in place. And just like earlier when I was taking it off, to put it back on, I'm going to use my hammer and my screwdriver with the rubber part onto the clutch. And I'm going to hit it a few times to tighten it up. You have to spin this around as it moves to get a good angle on it. You just want to make sure you don't put the pry bars near the section where the magnet is. Give it another spin. Alright, the next step is adjusting the coil from the flywheel. You can either use a blade or a wire feeler gauge, or a little trick that I use is using a standard business card. The specs on the flywheel and coil clearance is from 10 thousandths of an inch to 14 thousandths of an inch, and your standard business card is going to be right around 12 thousandths of an inch. This is a whole lot easier to get in there to both sides, and it allows you to adjust both of them evenly with each other. Before you use any business card though, just take a pair of dial calipers and just check it real quick and make sure you are getting a proper adjustment. And I always go back with the feeler gauge to check it after I've done adjusting it. We want to start with the magnet facing downwards. Then we're going to take our business card and slide it into place. And remember, this is adjusted all the way up. So once we got that in place, just kind of hold it and then spin the flywheel around till you get the magnet directly centered up under the coil. And we'll get perfectly even. Now we're going to take our wrench and loosen up each bolt. And as we loosen it, the magnet's going to pull the coil down directly onto the magnet with that business card in place, and that's going to give us our proper clearance. Just barely loosen up each end, and you'll watch them drop down just like that, and you'll hear like a little click when it goes down. As soon as it does that, you just want to tighten them right back up. And just make sure you don't over tighten these little screws. Just give it a good snug, and then just rotate the flywheel outwards to get your card out, just like that. And then just give it a couple spins and make sure it's not hitting anywhere, so we're not getting any rubbing anywhere. So that's a good sign right there. I have my 12 thousandths of an inch feeler gauge. I'm just going to slide in, check both sides. Good snug fit on this end. Good snug fit on this end. You want to make sure you slide it all the way in there so it goes all the way across it. So we got the perfect adjustment right there. The next part is it's just putting everything back together, putting your mesh guard back on right here, and then putting your cover back on. Take this little cover right here, find our two little holes. Put our screws in. Just snug them up real good. Here's a little easy way to put the cover back on. You want to take the magnet and just face it directly up under that coil. That way, as you're trying to put this metal cover back on, that magnet isn't wanting to try to grab onto it while you slide it on there. Just be mindful of this little dust cover right here. Make sure your wire's in the appropriate place. And put your 3 bolts back in. And make sure to put your spark plug back in also. Get the right socket. snug it up, but don't over tighten it. As I said earlier, I feel like that the coil needs to be replaced. By looking at the wires, it's heavily dry rotted, but I'm going to give it a try to see if cleaning it actually did work. I know I've done it in the past and it did work, so I'm going to give it a try right quick. So as you can see right there, it was sparking, so we are getting fire now. Just by cleaning it and servicing it just and everything, it gave us where we got it spark again. So once I get the gas tank cleaned out, put some fresh gas in here, I'm going to try to run it and see how it runs. If you have a no firing condition on your small engine, you can use these steps right here to fix that a lot of times. Now sometimes you may have a certain part in there like the ignition coil or points or condenser that needs to be replaced, but a lot of times you can fix that problem just by doing these steps I just did. If you don't know that much about your engine, there's a lot of resources online such as YouTube. You can go and Google your certain engine, and you can find a lot of online manuals to help you out. Don't feel too overwhelmed of trying to dig into this yourself. If you have any mechanical knowledge, you can pretty much do this. Just have a little bit of patience and time, and just make sure you have everything labeled out, laid out, and don't mix your parts up and all that, and it'll make it a whole lot easier. I have a video I previously uploaded a couple weeks ago that I went through the steps to figure out what my problem was with it not running, determining which system that failed, whether it was the fuel system, the ignition system, or a mechanical system failure inside the engine. And I just went through some steps to kind of narrow it down to figure out which one was the problem. I'll put a link in the description below to that video so you can check it out to see how I determined that I had an ignition system problem. If you like this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.